So I'm going to assume that you want to make the most and the fastest language learning progress possible, And the way we do that is by incorporating the best possible habits into our language learning routine. So in this video, I'm basically going to talk about the top 5 best language learning habits, in my opinion, things that I try and do as much as possible and things that I would recommend you do as well. And if you stick around to the end, I'm also going to give you a bonus tip, something that I haven't really mentioned that much, but I do a lot and I've been doing for a while, and it's extremely good for making progress. So let's get straight into it. The first tip that I'm going to give you is what I call eat the frog. So this is probably sounds very, very strange, but I'm going to explain it. So eat the frog basically comes from an analogy where if you had to eat a frog with your dinner, so say for example you're having like pasta or something for dinner, but for whatever reason you also had to eat a live frog, like it was like a cold, disgusting frog that was going to bleed everywhere. Would it be better to eat that frog before dinner or after dinner? I think most people would agree that they would rather eat the frog before dinner and then get it out of the way so they could wash it down with something nice, rather than have to eat dinner and then the whole time be thinking about the fact that they're going to have to eat this disgusting live frog afterwards. And yeah, it just wouldn't be good. So how does this make any sense at all? What is the relevance to language learning? Eat the frog is basically a productivity tactic where it is better to do the more difficult and more important tasks first, to do them earlier in the day for the same reason that you would eat the frog before the dinner. So if you have, for example, flashcards or whatever task you're going to do every single day, it is super important that you try and do these things earlier in the day because one, you are more fresher, your concentration is higher, and two, it's just easier to get them out of the way so you don't have to think about them anymore. And a few other reasons that it's also good to do these things earlier in the day include if you push them later in the day, it's way easier to run out of time, which leads you to be inconsistent, and then that kind of just derails the whole language learning process. And another reason I will say that eating the frog is a really good tactic for anything, but especially language learning, is to do with brain points. So effectively, as you go throughout the day, brain points is kind of like a silly made up word for it, but as you go throughout the day, right, you slowly get more and more kind of fatigued mentally, and it's more difficult to focus on deep work tasks that require a lot of attention and focus for periods of time longer than a few minutes. And basically at the start of the day, you have more brain points. It is easier to focus on things if you do them earlier. Yes, sometimes you can be a bit groggy getting out of bed, but basically once that period of kind of sluggishness is over, you are in a period where you're able to concentrate more than if you push all of your language learning tasks right to the end of the day. So I would recommend that as well. It could be flashcards, it could be journaling, it could be whatever habit you want to do first thing, but just doing something first thing every single day, even if it isn't your biggest language learning task, is, I think, really good. So the second thing that I'm going to recommend you do, the second habit of really effective language learners, is setting short-term goals. So you've probably set some kind of, if you're a fan of the channel at all, if you're not, by the way, subscribe, but you've probably set some kind of long-term goal for language learning. So for example, if you want to learn Italian for X reason, maybe it's to go there on a holiday, you might have said, okay, I'm going to try and learn it in 1 year or something like that. And that's great. You should have long-term goals. However, if you only have long-term goals, it's more difficult to achieve them than if you had long-term goals and short-term goals. By short-term goals, I basically mean little goals that kind of over time you tick the boxes one by one and they kind of go towards the long-term goal. So a short-term goal, as a random example, could be this week you're studying animal-related vocab. That could be what you're targeting this week effectively. And then next week you're doing verb conjugation, etc. And if you can tick all of those boxes in a row, by the end of the long-term goal period, if it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, you will have basically achieved that goal. And it doesn't have to be an exact science or it's like perfectly matched up, but just setting little like short-term goals every single week of something you're going to try and focus on that week, try and improve in, is I think a really good way to make sure you are in fact making progress. And when I did start doing this, I found I actually made a lot more progress. So the way you set short-term goals is you should have some kind of like calendar or notebook or whatever where you can write this goal down. You would basically write the target for a certain period of time. So it could be not a daily target, that's too small. You can have daily goals, but that's probably too small for what I'm talking about right now. Either a weekly or a fortnightly kind of goal, maybe even a monthly goal if you want. But basically, you're setting a small period of time and a particular focus for that period of time. So it could be animal-related vocab, it could be, any other vocab group, jobs, food, etc. It could be verb conjugation, it could be a grammatical concept, it could be pronunciation, it could be speaking to people, it could be any kind of goal you want. And then basically you would use the language learning methods in your arsenal, such as flashcards. I've mentioned flashcards too much, but any kind of language learning technique, you would try and target that within this period of time. By the way, if you want to learn more about the different techniques you can use to learn a language, I will have that video linked in the description if you want to check it out afterwards. But yeah, a bonus tip here as well is to kind of hit it again the next week to keep it fresh. So for example, if you have that animal related vocab target for this week and then next week you switch to another short-term goal, you can still do the animal flashcards like 2 or 3 times across the week just to kind of keep it fresh, even though it isn't the goal. I found that is really good as well. I've forgotten the scientific name for it. Spaced repetition, that's what it is. It does kind of implement spaced repetition a little bit, which I find can be good for remembering things. So number 3, the third tip I will give you, the third habit that highly effective language learners have, is to use diverse learning methods. And there's a very, very crucial reason for this. A lot of you probably struggle to remember things. So when you're trying to learn new words, for example, you might learn like 20 words in one go, and you find it quite difficult to remember a lot of them, and then after like a day or two, you've basically forgotten them all. I definitely understand that. I remember there was a day last year where I learnt, probably, when I say learnt, I don't mean memorized, because spoiler alert, I forgot them, but I probably did 200 Russian words that were completely foreign to me, and by the end of the study session, this was like hours of free time I spent studying for because I was being an idiot. By the end of that, I could do the entire flashcard deck passively. I was able to remember every single word, and then immediately I forgot most of them within like a week, simply because I didn't use this diverse learning method technique. So the way you actually remember new words or new anything is they need to be locked into your long-term memory. Yes, if I showed you a random word in a random language and its translation, you could probably remember it for a few minutes afterwards. But if I asked you a few days afterwards, odds are you would probably have forgotten it unless you made it your mission to try and prove me wrong and you were constantly thinking about that word. And the reason for that is because your brain is designed to only put important things into your long-term memory. If you're learning words and you haven't really taught your brain that these words are important, it's just going to forget them as short-term knowledge that was only important in the moment, but it's not important for you to remember long-term. So what we need to do when we're learning words is to teach our brain that this completely new vocab we've never encountered before is actually important so that we can lock it into our long-term memory. And here's where diverse learning methods come in. Because if you use diverse learning methods, and what I mean by that is various different ways of teaching yourself words or any stuff, when you use multiple different methods, it actually teaches your brain that this is extremely important, because you're not just encountering these new words or whatever through one channel, you're encountering them through a bunch of different roads effectively. So I'll give you an example for you to actually properly understand this. Say you were learning, you were doing, what's a random example? I find it difficult to think of examples on the top of my head. You were learning jobs, for example, occupations, like jobs in the foreign language, those kind of words, like artist, painter, firefighter, etc. Instead of just doing flashcards for those jobs, you could do the flashcards and you could write out all the words from memory once or twice a day. You could try and write a short story about it. You could listen to a 5-minute video about it. You could record yourself speaking about it, freestyle, and you could try and do a bunch of different, you could look at pictures as well when you're doing it. You could do a bunch of different things to basically expose yourself to this unfamiliar vocab, and this would help you understand these words faster, because you're teaching your brain that this is actually very important. We're encountering it in a bunch of different ways, and your brain is hardwired to effectively understand this. And a final thing on this third habit is to incorporate it into your short-term goals. So if your short-term goal is, for example, learning those occupation-related words, you could say, okay, I'm going to do flashcards. I'm also going to write all of the words out from memory before and after I do the flashcards, and I'm going to try and speak for 5 minutes about it every single day and record myself. It's totally up to you what things you do, but I'm just giving you these tips effectively to try and implement them into your routine, because they will help you. And a lot of the time, the reason you're not remembering words is because of simple things like this. So number 4, habit stacking. This is something I've talked about before, and I'm going to bring it up again, and I'm going to try and basically explain it quickly and also efficiently so that you can implement it as well as possible. Habit stacking is doing 2 things at the same time. For example, listening to a podcast while exercising. And the reason this is extremely important is because not only does it free up time, it's like you're doing 2 things at once. So you're basically doing extra stuff without actually losing any time. You're not trading time for it. But it's also fun. It's fun to listen to something while you go for a run. It makes doing chores better, etc. And a few of the things you can habit stack with are, chores, exercise, travel, anything hands-free. And I find the best tasks to habit stack with are listening related tasks. So if you're driving somewhere or doing exercise, you can easily listen to a podcast in the foreign language, and that's a little bit of extra exposure, basically for free because you were doing nothing anyway. So I've started trying to listen to, I'm listening to the slow Russian language podcast right now. I've got a picture of it on the screen. I will have it linked in the description if you do want to look at it and you are learning Russian. But I've tried listening to it in the car at the moment. I also listen to it sometimes when I'm eating or when I'm doing chores, like hanging up the washing. I don't really want to do 15 minutes of hanging up the washing and just be absolutely bored. I can easily put headphones on and listen to that while I'm doing it as well. And that's super good. I have noticed it does actually make me better at listening. My listening has improved. And I'm just having way more fun as well. A few other things you can habit stack with as well. You can try and habit stack immersion. So, that came out, that I didn't really say that right. What I mean by immersion is like, say for example, you are writing your to-do list or something in English or your native language, you can try and swap some words for the foreign language. So for me, when I write down the days, for example, because I date all my work, so I put the day and the date at the top of each page, I've started writing the day in Russian, even though that's like, days of the week are really easy. Понедельник, вторник, среда, they're quite easy to remember. I still do that because it's a little bit of immersion and it just makes me a little bit more into kind of the Russian mood. And you can also swap things as well. So if you're doing stuff in English, you can try and swap it to do it in the foreign language. Kind of the same as immersion, but yeah, that's habit stacking and I would highly recommend everyone does that as much as possible. The final tip I'm going to give you is something that I actually did from the very beginning on accident and I didn't realize how useful this actually was. So before I started learning Italian, I'd always been a bit of a Harry Potter fan, and I liked looking at the different editions of Harry Potter, like in different languages, and the different coloured the different illustrations on the front covers and that kind of stuff. It was just cool, and I'd always liked the Italian version simply because I just thought the artwork was really, really good. I probably won't link it in the description because I can't be bothered, but I've got pictures of it in other videos if you want to check them out. But I always thought it was cool, and so when I started learning Italian, I thought, okay, I'm going to buy these books, and when I'm good enough at Italian, I'll read them, and I've since read the entire series. I'm now reading the Harry Potter series in Russian, and I think it's really cool to have something little, not something overly expensive. It was like $100 to $200 probably, so, not cheap, but it wasn't like an arm and a leg, but something that has a little bit of actual value that is kind of cool and it keeps you motivated can be really, really good to keep you hooked into the language and just, it's good to have something to look forward to. So it could be a TV subscription, it could be a book series like what I did, it could be a course, a board game, it could be literally anything that is kind of locking you into that language learning zone and motivating you to constantly move forward. So yeah, I would highly recommend you try and find something that interests you in your native language and just try and find something similar in the language you're learning. You don't have to buy it straight away, but you can save it and keep your eye on it, and I think that is good as well. And if you are looking for a course at all, I do have my course, The Language Learning Accelerator, linked in the description. If you have any questions, you can comment below, but I'd highly recommend anyone looking to learn a language checks that out. But now, if you stuck around to the end, I'm going to give you my bonus tip that actually will turn you into a more effective language learner and a more effective human being in person if you do this. I try and do it once a week. And the bonus tip is journaling. So I'm not talking about journaling in the foreign language, although you can do that as well. I'm simply talking about journaling in your native language to problem solve. So you are constantly going to encounter problems in language learning and in life. And what a lot of people do is they go into emotional mode instead of problem-solving mode. As soon as they encounter a problem, like they can't remember words, or they don't have time to do something, or even if it's not language learning related, like it's I don't know, anything, they just feel like they don't like their job or whatever, they immediately go into emotional mode and they get frustrated. And that's just a terrible, terrible way to deal with problems in your life. What you need to do is go into problem-solving mode. So, for example, if you are having difficulty remembering words, I've obviously given you a bunch of tips in this video already, but what you could do is you could get a piece of paper in your language learning notebook or another notebook, or even just a piece of paper, but I would recommend you handwrite, and you can write out what is the problem, what frustration is this causing at the moment, okay, how do I fix this? And you can go through it logically, and I guarantee you will find, if you actually write things out, you will find you make so much more progress in solving these problems than if you just think about it. Like, I could not promise you more that this is the way. For me personally, I try and journal every Sunday, like at the end of each week, to kind of talk about what went well this week, what didn't go well, and so I can actually improve upon it for the next week. And you don't have to do that. You could do it once a day if you want. You could do it once every few weeks. You could do it randomly without actually having a strict time or like day of the week that you do it on, but I would just recommend you try and implement journaling, because this will turn you into a better learner and it will allow you to crush problems and you will learn faster. So yeah, hopefully you guys did find a lot of value in this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button because it makes me feel better about all the work I put in for free to help you guys. And yeah, have a good one.